Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval winter cabin, and I need you to understand something right from the start. This isn't some cozy Hallmark movie scenario. You're not going to find yourself wrapped in a hand-knitted blanket, sipping mulled wine while snow gently falls outside a frosted window. No, you're about to experience what actual cold feels like when there's nothing between you and January except some questionable woodwork and a prayer. The kind of cold that makes your modern heated apartment feel like a luxury spaceship. The kind of cold that killed people regularly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Some of you are winding down after a long day, others are already tucked in bed, and a few brave souls are probably listening at work, pretending to be productive. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's late November, maybe early December. The exact date doesn't matter much because medieval peasants didn't mark their calendars with cute little X's counting down to Christmas. You've just pushed open the warped wooden door of your winter cabin, and immediately, you feel it. That specific cold that isn't just temperature, it's presence. It's got weight. Your breath materializes in front of your face in thick clouds, and you realize with creeping dread that you're breathing the same air inside as you were outside. There's no temperature differential. None. Welcome to the harsh reality of medieval building techniques, where insulation was a concept that wouldn't be properly developed for another several centuries. Your cabin, and let's be generous and call it that instead of wooden box, measures maybe 12 by 15 feet. The walls are wattle and daub, which sounds quaint until you understand what it actually means. Picture a lattice of wooden strips woven together like a basket, then plastered over with a mixture of mud, straw, animal dung, and whatever else was lying around. In summer, this isn't terrible. In winter, the daub contracts, cracks, and suddenly you've got gaps in your walls that whistle when the wind blows. You run your hand along the interior wall and feel the draft coming through. Not a gentle breeze, we're talking actual moving air, cold as a knife blade, slicing through the cracks. Modern building codes require walls to have an R value, a measure of thermal resistance. Your cabin has an R value of approximately good luck with that. Historians estimate that medieval peasant dwellings had roughly 1/10 the insulation of a modern home, and that's being charitable. Some estimates go even lower. The floor beneath your feet is dirt, packed earth, maybe with some rushes scattered on top if you're fancy. And here's something your modern brain hasn't considered yet. Cold comes from below. Heat rises, which means cold sinks, and right now, the frozen ground is sucking warmth out of your body through your feet like a vampire. You're wearing leather shoes if you're lucky, with maybe some wool wrapped around your feet. The nobility get fancy boots. You get hope your toes don't fall off. Let's talk about that door you just walked through. It's wooden, obviously hung on leather hinges because metal is expensive. It doesn't fit the frame properly. Nothing in medieval construction fits properly because precision tools are in short supply. There's a gap at the bottom wide enough to slide your fingers under. The sides don't quite meet the frame. And there's no weather stripping, no rubber seal, no modern magic to keep the outside out and the inside in. You've essentially got a decorative barrier that keeps out wolves and most of the snow. Most of it. The single window, and you're fortunate to have even one, is covered with a stretched animal membrane. Pig bladder, sheep intestine, whatever was available. The wealthy might have oiled cloth or even a few small panes of extremely expensive glass. You have a semi-transparent sheet of pig that lets in a dim, filtered light and provides absolutely zero insulation. You can actually watch it move when the wind blows, rippling like water. Some people shutter their windows entirely for winter, choosing darkness over cold. Others stuff them with straw. You're starting to understand why. The ceiling, let's discuss that architectural marvel. It's low, maybe 7 feet at the peak if you're fortunate, made of rough-hewn timbers with thatch or wooden shingles above. No attic space, no insulation layer, no barrier between you and the elements except some vegetation that birds have been nesting in. When it snows, some of that snow melts from whatever minimal heat escapes upward, then refreezes, creating ice dams. When rain comes before a freeze, water seeps through and drips on you while you sleep. You'll wake up to find frost on the inside of your roof. Here's the thing that really gets you, though, the thing your modern brain keeps rejecting. There is no heating system. There's a hearth. One fire. That's it. No radiators, no ductwork, no thermostats, no separate heating for separate rooms because there are no separate rooms. This is it. One open space where you cook, eat, sleep, work, and try not to die. The fire you build will heat maybe a 6-foot radius effectively. Everywhere else, that's just outdoor temperature with a roof. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually understood heat retention or if they simply accepted cold as an unchangeable fact of winter life, like darkness or hunger. The evidence suggests both. They knew enough to stuff rags in the worst gaps, to hang fabric dividers to create smaller spaces, to huddle together for warmth. But the idea of a consistently warm interior space, the thing you take for granted every single day, was simply beyond their technological reach. This wasn't ignorance. It was material limitation. You've been inside for maybe 5 minutes, and your fingers are already aching. That's the first stage. The cold finds your extremities first: fingers, toes, nose, ears. Your body is already making decisions about what it can afford to keep warm. Core temperature maintenance is priority 1. Your fingers? Expendable. You flex them, trying to keep blood flowing, and wonder how people wrote manuscripts in monasteries during winter. The answer: painfully, slowly, with frequent breaks to warm hands over braziers. Let's address the elephant in the freezing room. You're going to sleep here. Tonight. Every night for the next 4 to 5 months. That pile of straw in the corner, that's your bed. If you're doing well, there's a wooden frame lifting it off the cold ground. More likely, it's just piled on the floor, covered with whatever fabric you own. A wool blanket if you're fortunate. Some rough linen. Maybe a sheepskin if you manage to keep a sheep alive through last winter. You'll sleep in your clothes. All of them. Every layer you own. The modern sleep experience, a climate-controlled room, a mattress engineered for comfort, clean sheets, a pillow designed by NASA or whatever, is so far removed from this reality that it's almost incomparable. You're gonna lie down on vegetation, pull fabric over yourself, and hope you generate enough body heat in your little cocoon to avoid hypothermia. People slept with their animals for warmth. Not as a quirky medieval custom, but as a survival strategy. A cow in your living space is a 1,500-pound space heater. Here's a delightful detail. The air inside your cabin will be thick with smoke. There's no chimney, or if there is, it's a hole in the roof that doesn't draft properly. The hearth fire fills the space with a constant haze that stings your eyes and coats your lungs. You'll cough constantly. Everyone coughs constantly. Respiratory infections are endemic. But you know what? That smoke is also killing some of the bacteria and parasites that would otherwise thrive in your home. It's preserving the meat hanging from your rafters. It's making the space marginally more bearable than it would be without fire. You're trading one health problem for another, and that's just how it works. The temperature inside will hover somewhere between uncomfortably cold and dangerously cold for the entire winter. Modern cold weather experts say that sustained exposure to temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit indoors is considered unhealthy. You're looking at indoor temperatures in the 30s and 40s on a good day. On a bad day, when the wind is really howling and the fire struggles, you might be in the 20s. inside your home. You stamp your feet, trying to drive warmth back into them, and notice that your breath isn't dissipating. It's just hanging in the air, adding to the general moisture that makes everything feel clammy. Your clothes are damp. The walls are damp. Damp cold is so much worse than dry cold because water conducts heat away from your body 25 times faster than air. You're essentially living in a refrigerator made of mud and sticks. And here's the kicker, the thing that's really going to haunt you. This is normal. This is what winter means for most of humanity in medieval Europe. The castle up on the hill is bigger, sure, made of stone, maybe with some tapestries on the walls to block drafts. But it's still cold. The king is still cold. His children huddle near fires wearing multiple layers. Wealthy merchants have slightly better setups, more fuel for bigger fires, but they're not warm, they're just less cold. True warmth, the kind where you can walk around in a t-shirt indoors in January, is a 20th century invention. Before central heating, before insulation, before double-paned windows and weather stripping and programmable thermostats, everyone was cold. The difference was just degrees of suffering. You look around your cabin with new eyes now, understanding what you've gotten yourself into. For months, maybe 5, in this space, with this cold. And we haven't even talked about keeping the fire alive, or what you're going to eat, or what happens when you get sick. We're just talking about the baseline reality of your new home. It cannot protect you from winter. It can only slightly delay your exposure to it. The light is fading outside. Another thing you're going to have to deal with soon, and you need to start making decisions. Fire first, obviously. Food, water, basic survival tasks that will consume every waking hour. But for now, just stand there in your drafty medieval cabin and let it sink in. You're not going to be warm again until spring. The hearth sits against the far wall, a crude stone arrangement that's supposed to be the heart of your home. Right now, it's just a cold pile of rocks with some ash residue, and you're staring at it with the dawning realization that your entire survival hinges on your ability to make fire happen and keep it happening. Every single day, multiple times per day, for months. No breaks, no days off. No, I don't feel like it today. The fire goes out, you die. It's really that simple. You kneel down in front of the hearth, and immediately the cold from the stone floor shoots through your knees like electricity. Mental note, kneel on something from now on. You've got your fire-starting kit, a piece of flint, a steel striker, and some char cloth if you prepared properly. If you didn't prepare properly, you're about to have a very long, very dark, very cold night. Let's assume you did the bare minimum and you've got the materials. Strike the steel against the flint. Sparks fly, little orange stars in the gloom, and most of them die before hitting your char cloth. Strike again, and again. Your fingers are already stiff from the cold, making the precise motion harder. There's a reason medieval people kept fires going continuously. Starting them from scratch is a genuine pain. Strike, strike, strike. Finally, a spark catches and the char cloth begins to glow. You've got maybe 30 seconds to transfer this to your tinder bundle before it dies. Your tinder is dried grass, birch bark shavings, maybe some pine needles if you gathered them in autumn. You cup the smoking char cloth and blow gently, encouraging the ember. Too hard and you'll blow it out. Too soft and it won't catch. This is a skill that takes practice, and medieval children learned it young because their lives literally depended on it. The tinder smokes, then blessed relief flames. Small flames, fragile flames, but flames nonetheless. Now comes kindling. Small sticks, progressively larger, building up the fire in stages. You can't just throw a log on your tiny flame and hope for the best. Well, you can, but then you'll be starting over in 10 minutes, colder and more frustrated. You feed small twigs, watching the fire grow, nursing it like a sick child, because that's essentially what it is. A living thing that needs constant attention and the right food. Here's where medieval fire management gets properly exhausting. You need different types of wood for different purposes. Softwoods like pine and fir ignite easily and burn hot but fast. Great for getting things started, terrible for overnight heat. Hardwoods like oak and ash burn slower and longer but take forever to catch. You need both. You need them dry. You need them split to the right size. And you need a lot of them. How much wood are we talking about? Historians estimate that a typical medieval household burned through approximately 4 to 6 cords of wood per winter. A cord is a stack measuring 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. That's roughly 128 cubic feet of wood. 6 cords is 768 cubic feet. Picture a pile of wood bigger than your cabin, and that's what you need to have gathered, cut, split, and stored before the first snow. Oh, and it needs to be dry, which means you should have cut it a year ago. Green wood doesn't burn efficiently. It smokes and sputters and wastes your effort. Your fire is growing now, crackling pleasantly, and you can feel heat radiating from it. Actual, genuine heat. You hold your hands toward the flames and feel the stiffness in your fingers starting to ease. This right here, this moment, is as warm as you're going to get. 6 feet from the fire, maybe 8 if it's really roaring. That's your warm zone. Everywhere else is still freezing. But you can't just sit here basking. The fire demands things. It needs to be fed every 30 to 45 minutes. Logs burn down. The flames die back. Your nice warm bubble shrinks. So you get up, immediately feeling the cold rush back in, and add another log. Position it carefully. Use a stick to adjust the burning wood, maximizing airflow. This is your life now. You're a fire tender. That's your primary job. Let's talk about what happens at night, because this is where things get truly dicey. You need to sleep. Humans require sleep to survive. But your fire also requires attention to survive. See the problem? Medieval people developed techniques for banking fires, essentially burying coals under ash to slow their burning rate, preserving the ember through the night so you could restart the flame in the morning without going through the whole flint and steel ordeal again. You take your longest burning hardwood logs and arrange them carefully. Pack ash around them. Cover the whole thing with a layer of ash like you're tucking the fire into bed. If you do this right, you'll have live coals in the morning. If you do it wrong, you wake up to cold ash and have to start from scratch. In January, before dawn, with numb fingers, the success rate isn't 100%, which is why people genuinely panicked when fires went out overnight. Here's a charming medieval solution that sounds insane to modern ears. Fire borrowing. If your fire died, you'd go to a neighbor and borrow some coals. Carry them back in a pot or a hollowed-out turnip. Protect them from wind and snow, and use them to restart your hearth. Communities had understood relationships about who could be relied upon for fire in an emergency. It was a social contract. You help me today, I'll help you tomorrow. Let someone's family freeze because you were stingy with your coals? You might find yourself very alone when you needed help. But back to your immediate situation. Your fire is burning nicely now, and the temperature within your warm bubble has climbed to something approaching tolerable. Maybe 60 degrees, possibly even 65 if you're right on top of the flames. The rest of the cabin is still in the 30s. You're living in a space with a 30-degree temperature differential. Your face is hot while your back is freezing. Turn around. Now your back is hot and your face is freezing. It's like being slowly rotisserie cooked, except you never actually get cooked. You just oscillate between uncomfortably hot and dangerously cold. Medieval people sat close to fires, much closer than your modern safety-conscious brain wants to allow. Scorch marks on clothing were common. Burns were common. Hair and beards getting singed was so routine that it barely warranted comment. You needed that heat, and the closer you got, the more heat you received. Simple physics with painful consequences. Now let's discuss smoke, because we touched on it earlier, but you're really experiencing it now. Your hearth has what passes for a chimney, either a hole in the roof with a bit of stone or brickwork to guide smoke upward, or maybe just a hole. The problem is that smoke is warm, which means it rises, but not in a neat, orderly column. It swirls. It eddies. It fills the upper portion of your cabin with a thick haze that makes your eyes water and your throat burn. You're living in what is essentially a smokehouse like the ones used to preserve meat, which, coincidentally, is exactly what's happening. There's probably meat hanging from your rafters right now, slowly curing in the smoke. Your clothes smell like smoke. Your hair smells like smoke. Your skin will smell like smoke. Visitors will smell you coming. But here's the thing, everyone smells like smoke. It's the baseline human scent in winter. You stop noticing it after a while, the same way you stop noticing a lot of things that would horrify your modern self. Historians still argue whether the constant smoke exposure contributed to shorter medieval lifespans or whether humans adapted to it reasonably well. The evidence leans toward it definitely didn't help. Respiratory problems were endemic. Chronic bronchitis, emphysema-like conditions, problems from constant irritation. But what choice did you have? No fire meant death from cold. Fire meant smoke. You chose life with smoke over death without it. The fire needs feeding again. You've been sitting here maybe 30 minutes and already the flames are diminishing. You add another log, adjust the coals, watch the flames leap up. This is going to be your rhythm. Feed fire, warm up, feel cold creeping back, feed fire again. Round and round all day into the night, forever and ever until spring. Let's address fuel anxiety, because you're definitely going to experience it. You look at your woodpile, let's say you prepared well and you've got a decent stack, and you start doing math. 3 logs every 2 hours. 12 hours of waking fire time per day. That's 18 logs daily. Times 30 days in a month. Times 5 months. That's 2,700 logs. Do you have 2,700 logs? Probably not. Better start rationing. Better get comfortable being colder. Medieval people developed an acute sense of fuel efficiency. They knew which woods burned longest. They knew how to position logs for maximum heat. They knew when to let the fire die down to save wood and when they couldn't afford to. This wasn't casual knowledge, it was survival mathematics. Run out of wood in February and you had 2 months of winter left with no way to cook. No way to warm yourself, no way to purify water. People died from poor fuel planning. And here's something your modern brain is definitely going to struggle with. You can't just pop out to gather more wood when you run low. In winter, when everything is covered in snow and ice, when the temperature outside is in the teens or lower, when daylight lasts maybe 8 hours. Sure, you can go out in desperation and hack away at frozen deadfall with an axe, but you're burning more calories doing it than the wet wood will provide in heat. You gather wood in summer and autumn. Winter is for burning what you gathered. That's the equation. The fire pops and crackles, sending a shower of sparks upward. One lands on the dried rushes on your floor. You stamp it out quickly, heart racing. Fire is your friend and your enemy simultaneously. Keeps you alive and it could kill you instantly. Medieval houses burned. Frequently, entire villages burned. Thatched roofs, wooden structures, open flames, dried vegetation, darkness making it hard to see embers. It was all a recipe for disaster. You had no fire extinguishers, no fire trucks, no way to call for help. A bucket of water if you were lucky and it wasn't frozen solid. More often, you just got out and watched your home and everything you owned burn to ash. Then you hoped your neighbors would take you in because rebuilding in winter wasn't really an option. This is why communities had strict social rules about fire management. Someone's carelessness could destroy everyone's homes. Let's talk about cooking, because that fire you're tending isn't just for warmth. It's also your stove, your oven, your microwave, your toaster, and your dishwasher all rolled into one. You've got a pot. iron if you're fortunate, clay if you're not, and you hang it over the flames using a hook or set it on stones at the fire's edge. Whatever you're eating tonight, it's getting heated in or near that fire. This means your cooking space and your living space and your heating space are all the same space. Smoke from cooking adds to smoke from heating. Grease spatters into the fire, sending up flares. You spill something and it either burns on the hot stones or creates a mess on your dirt floor. The smell of cooking food, if you're lucky enough to have food to cook, mingles with smoke and dampness and unwashed bodies and animal scent if you're keeping livestock inside. Medieval people weren't idiots. They knew this was unpleasant. But unpleasant beats dead from freezing. So you make your peace with it. You develop strategies. Cook when you're already feeding the fire for warmth. Prepare foods that can simmer all day so you're not wasting fuel on short, hot fires. Eat a lot of your food cold to conserve wood. These aren't choices born from preference. They're forced by circumstance. The fire is dying down again. You're getting good at reading it now, the way the flames shrink, the way the glow dims. You add wood, adjust, tend. This is your life's rhythm now, measured in fuel and flame. You think about the thermostat on the wall of your modern home, how you thoughtlessly adjusted it up or down, how you never once considered the miracle of on-demand heat, how you complained when your apartment got down to 68 degrees. Night is coming. You can see the dim light through your pig bladder window fading to gray, then darker gray, then black. Time to bank the fire for sleep. You follow the procedure: long logs, careful arrangement, ash covering. You whisper a little prayer, not particularly religious but desperate. Please let there be coals in the morning. Please don't make me start from scratch in the frozen darkness. Please. You settle into your straw bed, as close to the hearth as you dare without risking rolling into the coals during the night. You can feel heat radiating from the stones, but it's already fading. In an hour, maybe two, those stones will be cold too. You pull every scrap of fabric you own over yourself and try to convince your body to relax. The fire cracks and pops in its ash bed, settling. You watch the faint glow, hypnotic and essential. That ember might be all that stands between you and death by morning. No pressure or anything. You wake up, if you can call that fitful, shivering half-consciousness waking up, and your first thought isn't about comfort or coffee or checking your phone. It's about food. Specifically, how much food you have left and whether it's enough to get you to spring. Welcome to the starvation clock, and spoiler alert, the math is absolutely brutal. Let's start with what you managed to store away before winter locked you in. If you were smart and fortunate, you've got a root cellar, basically a hole dug into the ground, maybe lined with stones, where the temperature stays cool but above freezing. In there, you've got turnips, parsnips, carrots, onions, and beets. Roots vegetables, the unglamorous heroes of medieval winter survival. They're not exciting. They're not delicious. But they don't spoil quickly, and that makes them worth more than gold right now. How many turnips does it take to survive a winter? Let's do some medieval math. An adult human needs roughly 2,000 calories per day to maintain body weight under normal conditions. But these aren't normal conditions. You're cold, which means your body is burning extra calories just to maintain core temperature. You're doing physical labor, hauling water, chopping wood, tending animals. You're probably looking at 2,500 to 3,000 calories per day just to avoid wasting away. A turnip has about 36 calories. Let me give you a moment to process that. 36. To hit 2,500 calories, you'd need to eat roughly 70 turnips per day. Per day. For 5 months. That's 10,500 turnips. You do not have 10,500 turnips. Nobody has 10,500 turnips. This is why medieval peasants were perpetually on the edge of starvation. The math simply didn't work out. So what else is in your stores? Dried peas and beans if you had a good harvest. These are significantly better calorically, about 340 calories per cup of dried peas. More realistic, you might have grain, rye, barley, oats, stored in sacks, hopefully protected from moisture and rodents. Grain is your caloric backbone. A pound of barley gives you roughly 1,600 calories. That's survivable. 3/4 of a pound per day gets you through on barely enough energy to function. But here's the problem. You don't just have grain. You have grain that needs to last until next harvest, which isn't in spring. It's in late summer or early autumn. You're not rationing for 5 months. You're rationing for 8 or 9. The grain you're eating in January has to leave enough for February, March, April, May, June, July, and August. Every bowl of porridge you eat now is a bowl you won't have in June. The anxiety never stops. Medieval people talked about the hunger gap. That period in late spring and early summer when last year's stores were depleted, but this year's crops weren't ready yet. People lost weight. Children stopped growing. The elderly died. Communities pulled together, sharing what little they had. But sometimes there simply wasn't enough to share. You're experiencing the build-up to that gap right now in January, knowing it's coming and being unable to stop it. Let's inventory your protein sources, because humans need more than carbohydrates to survive. You've got salted pork, hopefully bacon, basically, but saltier than anything you've ever tasted. Salt was the medieval refrigerator, and meat preservation meant packing it in salt until it was more salt than meat. You'll need to soak it before eating or risk serious kidney problems from sodium overload. Each piece of salted pork is precious. You're not eating bacon for breakfast. You're eating tiny portions to flavor your grain porridge, making it barely tolerable. Smoked fish if you're near water and had a good autumn catch. Dried fish if you're inland with access to trade. These are your omega-3s, your protein supplements, your variety. But they're also disgusting by modern standards, hard as leather, fishy in a way that goes beyond fishy into something approaching biological warfare. You gnaw on dried cod like it's jerky, and it kind of is, except it's been hanging in your smoky cabin for 3 months and tastes exactly like you'd expect. Cheese. Bless cheese. If you kept a cow or goats through autumn, you might have made hard cheese that can last for months. It's dense, caloric, portable, and doesn't spoil easily. A wheel of hard cheese is treasure. You ration it carefully, cutting thin slices, making it last. Historians still argue whether medieval cheese was actually any good or whether people just tolerated it because the alternative was starvation. Probably the latter, honestly. You've got dried herbs hanging from your rafters, not for flavor primarily, but for medicine and to mask the taste of food that's starting to turn. Sage, thyme, rosemary if you're fortunate. These aren't garnishes, they're survival tools. A bit of herb can make spoiled porridge tolerable. Tolerable enough to keep down anyway, which is the important part. Now let's talk about what you don't have. Fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, anything with vitamin C. Scurvy is a real concern. Your gums will start to bleed by late winter. Your teeth might loosen. Old wounds might reopen as your collagen breaks down. Medieval people didn't understand vitamin C, but they knew that certain foods prevented certain sicknesses. Preserved fruits, dried apples, for instance, weren't luxuries. They were medical necessities. Some households kept a barrel of sauerkraut or other fermented vegetables. The fermentation process preserves vitamin C, meaning kraut could literally save your life. If you were smart enough to put some up in autumn, you're in better shape than most. If not, you're going to spend late winter feeling progressively worse and not understanding why. You walk to your root cellar, probably just a corner of your cabin where you've dug down a few feet, and take inventory. Really look at it. Count what's there. Do the math. This pile of sad vegetables and these sacks of grain are supposed to sustain you until summer. It looks impossibly small. It is impossibly small. You're going to be hungry, not skipped lunch hungry. Genuinely, painfully, constantly hungry. Medieval people lived in a state of semi-starvation every winter. Your body will adapt. Your stomach will shrink. You'll think about food constantly, dreaming about it, fantasizing about spring when fresh greens appear, imagining the taste of fresh bread. Food obsession isn't a modern eating disorder. It's what happens when scarcity is real and constant. Here's a grim detail. You'll start to notice which animals are weaker, which ones might not make it to spring. That sick chicken? She's dinner tonight, before she dies on her own and the meat is wasted. That elderly goat who's struggling? Better to slaughter now while you can control the process. You become calculating about death in ways that would horrify your modern self. But this isn't cruelty. It's survival mathematics. Some families ate their seed grain in desperate winters. This was essentially suicide by starvation, just delayed. Seed grain was supposed to be sacrosanct. That's next year's crop, next year's survival. But when your children are crying from hunger right now, next year is abstract. The temptation to eat the seeds is overwhelming. Communities had rules against it. Churches preached about it. People did it anyway and then had nothing to plant in spring. Let's discuss meal frequency, because you're not eating 3 square meals a day. You're eating twice if you're fortunate, maybe a morning porridge and an evening stew. The midday meal is a luxury you can't afford. Every meal means burning firewood to cook, using food that you need to ration, spending time on preparation that could go to other survival tasks. You consolidate. You simplify. You eat to survive, not for pleasure. Your morning porridge is grain, barley, or oats, boiled with water into a thick gruel. Maybe you add a bit of salt if you have it. Maybe a dried herb. It's gray, it's lumpy, and it's the exact same thing you ate yesterday and will eat tomorrow. Variety isn't a thing. You eat what you have, and you're grateful for it because the alternative is eating nothing. Dinner is similar. Maybe you've added a piece of turnip to the pot, or a bit of that salted pork for flavor. You've created stew, which is being generous. It's more like hot water with food particles. But it's warm, and warmth is valuable. You hold the wooden bowl in your hands, absorbing the heat, making the experience last because this might be the warmest your fingers get all day. Bread would be amazing, but bread requires flour and yeast and an oven, and you probably don't have an oven, you have a hearth. You can make flatbreads on hot stones if you're clever, but that uses a lot of flour for a small amount of food. Most people save the grain for porridge because you get more volume and more meals out of it that way. Bread is for festivals, for special occasions, for dreams of better times. You're hungry after your meal. Still hungry. The bowl is empty and your stomach is still sending up complaints. This is normal. This is every meal. You're existing on enough food to prevent death, but not enough to feel satisfied. Medieval people had a constant low-level hunger that modern people in developed nations simply don't experience. You go to bed hungry. You wake up hungry. Hunger is the baseline. Children had it worse. Growing bodies need more calories, but there are no extra calories to give. Kids' growth was stunted. They were smaller than they should have been. When you see statistics about medieval people being shorter, it's not genetics, it's malnutrition. Chronic, unavoidable, winter-inflicted malnutrition. Here's something that's going to mess with your head. You'll start to view food as the absolute measure of wealth. A family with a full grain store is rich, regardless of what else they have. A neighbor who can offer you a meal is generous beyond measure. Status, power, security, it all comes down to who has food and how much. Modern concerns about money or possessions seem absurd when you're counting turnips and hoping they last until April. Some communities had communal stores, grain kept aside for emergencies, distributed when individual families ran out. This was socialism born from necessity. Let one family starve and you weaken the whole community. Everyone needed to survive for the group to survive. But even communal stores ran out sometimes, and then it was just hope and prayer and waiting for spring. Trade in winter was difficult but not impossible. If you had something valuable, a good wool fleece, a tool, your labor come spring, you might trade for food. But everyone was in the same position. Everyone needed food. What could you possibly offer that was worth someone else giving up their precious calories? The economics of desperation don't favor the desperate. You'd think people would hunt, right? Fresh meat is out there in the forests. Deer, boar, rabbits. But hunting in winter is brutally difficult. Animals are scarce, hidden, hibernating, or simply dead. The few that remain are as desperate as you are. Also, in most of medieval Europe, hunting was restricted. The forests belonged to nobility. Poaching could get you hanged. You'd risk it if you were desperate enough, people did, but the cost-benefit analysis was grim. Steal a deer, feed your family for a week, maybe get executed. Those are tough odds. Fishing through ice was possible if you were near water and had the tools. But again, fish in winter are sluggish, deep, hard to catch. You'd burn calories hiking to the water, chopping through ice, sitting in freezing temperatures waiting for a bite. Maybe you'd catch something. Maybe you'd just burn energy you couldn't afford to lose. Every activity has to be weighed against caloric expenditure versus caloric gain. You look at your stores again, a habit you'll develop, checking and rechecking like somehow the food will have multiplied. It hasn't. If anything, you notice things you missed before. That sack of grain has a hole. Mice have been at it. You just lost a week's worth of calories to rodents. The rage you feel is profound and useless. You can't uneat what the mice ate. You can only adjust your rations downward and hope. Some of your root vegetables are going soft. You need to use them soon before they rot completely. You'll add extra to tonight's stew. A small feast before they're wasted. But that means your stores are depleting faster. The math keeps shifting, never in your favor. You're playing a game where the rules are designed to make you lose, and winning just means losing more slowly than everyone else. By February, you'll be eating things you wouldn't have considered food in November. Moldy bread? Cut off the worst of it and eat the rest. Grain with weevils? Extra protein. Vegetables that are mostly rot? Boil them long enough and hope. Your standards adjust downward to meet reality. This isn't choosing to eat poorly. It's eating what exists or not eating at all. And lurking in the back of your mind always is the knowledge that if something goes wrong, if you get sick and can't work, if the fire goes out and you lose days recovering, if raiders come through and take your stores, if any one of 1,000 disasters strikes, you're done. There's no safety net, no emergency services, no food banks or grocery stores. You have what you have, and when it's gone, you die. The hunger clock is ticking, and spring is still months away. You're thirsty. Simple enough, right? Just turn on the tap and... Oh wait, there is no tap. There's no plumbing. There's no municipal water system. There's just you, winter, and the fundamental problem that water exists in exactly 2 states right now. Frozen solid or potentially lethal. Welcome to the paradox that killed more medieval people than you'd think. Let's start with the obvious source, the well. If your community has a well, you're already ahead of most people. Wells are expensive, labor-intensive, and require specific geological conditions. Somebody had to dig down, sometimes 50 feet or more, through soil and rock until they hit groundwater. That's a massive community investment. But let's say you have one. Great. It's January, and the top 3 feet of that well are frozen solid. You walk to the well in the pre-dawn darkness, your breath forming ice crystals in the air, and peer down into it. You can't see water. You see ice. Thick, stubborn, merciless ice. Someone's gonna have to break through it, and that someone is probably you. You've got a long pole with a metal weight on the end, essentially a medieval icebreaker. You drop it, letting gravity do the work, and listen to it crack through layers of ice. Drop, crack, drop, crack. Your arms are already tired and you haven't even reached water yet. 15 minutes later, you've got a hole. You lower your bucket, wooden or leather, attached to a rope, and pull up water. Freezing water. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache just looking at it. You'll need to make multiple trips today because water is heavy and you need several gallons. For drinking, for cooking, for the animals if you're keeping any alive. Each trip to the well is an expedition into the cold that saps your energy and exposes you to frostbite. But here's the fun part. By tomorrow morning, that hole you worked so hard to create will be frozen over again. So you get to repeat this entire process. Every single day. For 5 months. It's like Sisyphus, except instead of a boulder, you're battling ice. And instead of existential punishment, it's just regular medieval life. Now let's say you don't have a well. Many people didn't. Your water source is a stream or river. In summer, this is straightforward. Walk to the water, fill your containers, walk back. In winter, that stream is either frozen or flowing so slowly that it's mostly ice with a bit of water underneath. You'll need to break through the ice, scoop out water from below, all while kneeling on a frozen bank that's trying to give you hypothermia through your knees. Rivers that aren't completely frozen are actually more dangerous. Fast-moving water in winter means the ice is unstable. You could break through and fall in, and falling into freezing water is essentially a death sentence. You've got maybe a few minutes before cold shock response kicks in and you can't control your breathing. Maybe 10 minutes before you lose motor function in your extremities. Maybe 15 before you lose consciousness. And good luck getting out of a hole in ice when you can't feel your fingers. Medieval people drowned in winter water accidents frequently enough that communities had protocols for it. Which tells you something about the risk assessment. The danger was worth it because the alternative was dying of thirst. You need water. You need it every day. You'll take the risk of drowning because not taking it means certain death. Let's discuss water quality, because this is where things get properly medieval. That stream you're drawing from? Upstream, there's another village. That village has people. Those people produce waste. That waste goes into the stream. Are you connecting the dots here? Your drinking water has passed through other people's latrines. It's carrying bacteria, parasites, all sorts of microscopic horrors that won't be understood for another 600 years. But you're not thinking about bacteria because you don't know bacteria exist. You can see that the water is brownish. You can smell that it's not great. But it's liquid and you're thirsty, so you drink it. Maybe you get lucky and stay healthy. Maybe you get dysentery and spend 3 days losing fluids from both ends, getting dehydrated, getting weaker, all while trying to maintain your survival routine in a freezing cabin. Dysentery in winter is a death sentence for the elderly and young children. Smart medieval people knew that boiling water made it safer, even if they didn't understand why. They noticed that people who drank boiled water got sick less often. So you bring your hard-won water back to your cabin and boil it, which means lighting or feeding your fire, which means burning wood, which means depleting your fuel stores. Every cup of safe drinking water costs you fuel. You're trading one resource for another in an endless game of survival economics. Here's a trick that medieval people figured out. Snow and ice are cleaner than stream water. If you're going to melt something for drinking water, freshly fallen snow is actually not a terrible option. It hasn't been on the ground long enough to absorb too many contaminants. It's cold and clean, relatively speaking. But melting snow is calorically expensive. Snow is mostly air, so you need a lot of it to produce a little water, and you're burning with the whole time it's melting. Do the math with me. 1 gallon of water weighs about 8 pounds. 1 gallon of snow weighs far less, maybe 2 pounds because it's mostly air. So to get 1 gallon of drinking water, you need to collect about 4 gallons of snow by volume. That's multiple trips outside scooping snow into containers, multiple trips back, all while exposing yourself to cold. Then you need to keep a fire going long enough to melt it all. For 1 gallon of water, you need about a gallon per day for drinking and cooking minimum. More if you're doing laundry, which you won't be, or bathing, which you definitely won't be. So every single day, you're either breaking through ice at the well, or risking stream bank accidents, or collecting massive amounts of snow. There's no day off from water. Your body doesn't care that you're tired. It needs hydration or it shuts down. Let's talk about storage, because you can't make multiple water trips per day. That's not fuel efficient or time efficient. You need to store water inside your cabin, but inside your cabin it's barely above freezing. Water stored in wooden buckets will freeze overnight. You'll wake up to solid ice where your water used to be. Solutions: keep the water near the fire, but not too near or the wooden bucket might burn. Store it in the warmest part of your cabin, which is still pretty cold, except that you'll need to break ice in your own water bucket come morning. Some people stored water in pottery vessels with narrow necks, reasoning that a smaller opening would freeze slower. Maybe it worked. Maybe it was superstition. Either way, you're starting your morning by fishing ice chunks out of your drinking water. That's just normal. That's Tuesday. Here's a medieval life hack that sounds insane. People drank ale and beer instead of water. Not because they wanted to be drunk constantly. Medieval ale was weaker than modern beer, but because the brewing process involved boiling water, which killed the nasty stuff. A weak ale was safer than stream water. Children drank it. Priests drank it. Everyone drank it because it was simply less likely to kill you than raw water. But brewing requires grain, which you're already rationing for food. Every batch of ale is grain that doesn't become porridge. Most families couldn't afford to brew regularly in winter. You saved the ale for when someone was sick, when they needed hydration but couldn't risk waterborne illness making them worse. Ale was medicine as much as beverage. You'll also drink milk if you kept a cow or goats alive. Milk is hydration plus calories plus protein. It's basically a superfood if you can digest it. Many medieval adults couldn't. Lactose intolerance was more common before generations of selection pressure in dairy farming communities. If you could digest it, though, milk was valuable enough to justify keeping an animal alive through winter despite the enormous food cost of feeding it. But here's the thing about keeping animals alive. They need water too. A cow needs about 30 gallons per day. 30 gallons. You're struggling to get 1 gallon for yourself, and now you need to get 30 more? The math doesn't work unless you have multiple people hauling water all day. This is why only families with teenage children or extended households could afford winter livestock. It was a labor equation. Smaller animals are more practical. A chicken needs about a cup of water per day. Achievable. Goats need a couple gallons. Difficult but doable. Pigs need 3 to 5 gallons, and also they'll freeze if you don't keep them inside with you. So now you're sharing your cabin with an animal that smells like, well, like a pig. But that pig is ham come spring, so you make peace with it. You also give it your water ration before your own because dead pig equals no ham. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood dehydration as a medical concept or just knew that not drinking water made you feel terrible and eventually killed you. Probably the latter. They didn't need to understand the physiology. They just needed to observe cause and effect. No water equals death. Therefore, get water. The motivation was clear even if the mechanism wasn't. Let's discuss what happens when you don't get enough water. Because rationing applies to water just like it applies to food. Mild dehydration makes you tired, gives you headaches, reduces your ability to think clearly. You're already tired from cold and hunger. Add dehydration and you're operating at maybe 50% mental capacity. Making decisions, planning ahead, executing complex tasks. All of it gets harder. Moderate dehydration leads to dizziness, weakness, and confusion. You might think you're fine and then stand up too quickly and pass out, cracking your head on the stone hearth. Congratulations, you now have a head injury with no medical care available. Severe dehydration means organ failure and death, but you'll probably freeze before it gets that far because your body can't regulate temperature properly when dehydrated. Your urine is dark brown by midwinter. That's just standard. Clear urine is something you won't see again until spring. You're chronically underhydrated because getting enough water is simply too difficult. Your body adapts. Kidneys become more efficient. You produce less urine. You need slightly less water to function. But adapts doesn't mean thrives. It means survives despite suboptimal conditions. Here's a charming detail. In really cold snaps, when everything is frozen solid and getting water becomes nearly impossible, people ate snow directly. Not melted, just packed snow straight into your mouth. This is actually dangerous. Eating frozen material lowers your core body temperature. Your body has to spend energy melting it and warming it to body temperature. You're burning calories to hydrate, which is a losing proposition when calories are scarce. But desperation makes you stupid, and thirst is a powerful motivator. Some communities built crude aqueduct systems, basically trenches or wooden channels that carried water from a source to the village. These would freeze solid in winter, becoming useless decoration until spring thaw. The Romans had mastered aqueducts centuries earlier, but that knowledge was largely lost in medieval Europe. Medieval people were essentially starting from scratch, relearning engineering through trial and error. You'll become obsessed with ice. You'll study it. You'll learn that ice from the top of standing water is clearer and safer than ice from the bottom, which can trap sediment and whatever was living in the water. You'll learn that ice has different sounds when it's thick versus thin. You'll become an ice expert not because you want to but because your life depends on it. The quality of your water will decline as winter progresses. Early winter, you're pulling water from sources that froze recently and cleanly. By late winter, you're chipping away at ice that's been sitting there for months, accumulating whatever the wind blew in, whatever animals walked across it, whatever generally disgusting medieval environment contributed. That last month of winter, you're drinking water you'd never touch in November. But it's March and you're desperate and spring is almost here, so you drink it and hope. Water is life. You knew that abstractly before, but now you know it practically, painfully, constantly. Every cup of water represents effort and risk and resource expenditure. You'll go to sleep thirsty because making another trip to the well in the dark isn't worth the danger. You'll wake up thirsty because the water you stored froze overnight. Thirst becomes background noise, like hunger and cold, just another form of suffering you accept as the price of survival. And somehow, impossibly, you're only partway through winter. That well is going to freeze again tomorrow. The stream will still be dangerous. The snow will still need melting. The paradox continues. Surrounded by water in its solid form, dying of thirst for lack of it in liquid form. You take another sip of boiled stream water and try not to think too hard about where it came from. You haven't bathed in 6 weeks. Let's just start there. Get it out in the open. 6 weeks of sweat, smoke, dirt, and whatever else accumulates on a human body that's living in what amounts to a semi-frozen dirt box with livestock. You smell. You absolutely reek. And here's the thing that's going to mess with your modern sensibilities. You don't even notice anymore. Nobody notices because everyone smells exactly the same. Bathing in medieval winter wasn't a matter of personal preference or hygiene standards. It was functionally impossible. Let's walk through why. First, you'd need water. We've already established that water is precious, difficult to obtain, and requires breaking through ice or melting snow. Now multiply that problem by about 30, because you need enough water to actually submerge or wash your body. That's gallons and gallons of water. Okay, you've somehow gathered enough water. Now you need to heat it because bathing in ice-cold water in January is a fast track to hypothermia. Heating that much water requires an enormous fire, burning for hours, consuming what you can't afford to waste. You're literally choosing between being clean and being warm, between smelling better and eating. The math doesn't work out in favor of bathing. Let's say you're stubborn and you do it anyway. You've gathered the water, heated it, and now you're stripping down in your freezing cabin. The second your clothes come off, you're exposed to air that's in the 30s. Your wet skin in contact with that air loses heat 25 times faster than dry skin. You've got maybe a few minutes to wash before shivering becomes uncontrollable. Your fingers go numb. Your core temperature drops. And for what? To be clean for approximately 6 hours before you're covered in smoke and dirt again? Medieval people knew about public bathhouses. They existed, especially in towns and cities. They were social spaces where people gathered, bathed, gossiped, and conducted business. But bathhouses required infrastructure, buildings, heating systems, water sources, staff. They existed in summer and autumn. In winter, most closed down. The fuel cost was too high. The customers couldn't afford it. The water systems froze. Bathhouses were seasonal operations, which meant winter hygiene was a personal problem. So you don't bathe. Nobody bathes. Your hair becomes greasy, then matted, then essentially felted together into something resembling natural dreadlocks. You'll develop an itchy scalp. That's lice. Everyone has lice. Lice are just part of human existence. You'll spend idle moments picking them out of your hair and your children's hair, crushing them between your fingernails. It's bonding time. It's grooming. It's utterly disgusting by modern standards and completely normal by medieval ones. Your skin develops a layer, there's no polite way to say this, a layer of grime. Dead skin cells, smoke residue, cooking grease, dirt, sweat, all combining into a protective coating that probably has its own microbiome. You can actually see the dirt lines on your neck, in the creases of your elbows, behind your ears. You're wearing your filth like a second skin. And again, this is normal. This is everyone. The king is dirty. The bishop is dirty. Cleanliness is simply not achievable. You'll do spot cleaning. A damp cloth, using water you can't afford to waste, to wipe your face and hands. This is the medieval equivalent of a shower, and you'll do it maybe once a week if you're fastidious. The rest of you just stays dirty. Your feet especially, because you're wearing your shoes constantly and those shoes are damp from melting snow and your feet are sweating and it all creates a fungal paradise. Medieval foot hygiene was a nightmare. Athlete's foot, trench foot, frostbite, pick your ailment. Let's talk about your clothes because you're not washing those either. Laundry requires even more water than bathing, plus soap if you can afford it, plus somewhere to dry the clothes after. Wet clothes in winter are dangerous. They'll freeze solid if you hang them outside, and if you keep them inside, they'll never fully dry in the cold. Damp air. Damp clothes rob heat from your body, so your clothes stay on your body, getting progressively more disgusting until spring. You're wearing layers, a linen undertunic, wool outer layers, maybe leather or fur if you're fortunate. That inner linen layer is supposed to absorb sweat and keep the outer layers clean. Supposed to. By January, that undertunic is essentially a bacterial culture experiment. Stiff with dried sweat. It smells like death. You might try to air it out. Take it off briefly, shake it, let the cold air hit it. This does approximately nothing except expose you to cold. Your outer wool layers are better because wool has natural antimicrobial properties. It resists odor better than linen or cotton. But resists doesn't mean prevents. By midwinter, your wool tunic smells like smoke primarily, with undertones of body odor, animals, cooking food, and regret. You'll brush it occasionally, trying to remove the worst of the dirt and debris. Medieval people had clothes brushes, just stiff bristles to knock loose the surface grime. It's better than nothing. Now let's address the bathroom situation, because you probably thought things couldn't get worse. You're wrong. Your toilet is a wooden bench with a hole in it, positioned over a pit you dug outside last autumn. In summer, this is merely unpleasant. In winter, it's a fresh circle of hell. First, you have to leave your cabin, going from barely tolerable cold to dangerous cold. Then you have to expose sensitive body parts to freezing air. Then you have to balance on a frozen wooden seat while trying to do your business with numb extremities. The actual physics of using a privy in winter are worth considering. Everything is cold. Your clothing is layers deep. You're trying to minimize exposed skin while maximizing necessity. It's a logistical puzzle with high stakes. Get it wrong and you're dealing with consequences in an era with no running water, no toilet paper, and no laundry facilities. Medieval people used leaves, moss, or corn cobs for cleaning themselves. In winter, they used whatever wasn't frozen solid. Sometimes that meant old rags or sheep's wool. Sometimes it meant just dealing with it. Here's where it gets really medieval. Some people kept chamber pots inside for nighttime use. A ceramic or metal pot that you'd use rather than venturing outside in the darkness. Then, in the morning, you'd have to empty it. Carry a pot of human waste through your living space, out the door, and dump it in the privy pit or just outside. This was normal. Children did this. Everyone did this. The smell alone would make a modern person gag, but medieval noses were calibrated differently. The privy pit itself is another horror show. In summer, it smells terrible, but at least things decompose. In winter, everything freezes. You're building a literal pile of frozen waste that will stay there until spring thaw. The medieval term for the person who cleaned out privy pits was gong farmer, and they were paid relatively well because nobody else wanted the job. But gong farmers didn't work in winter. Too frozen. So that pit just accumulates all winter long. Some households, especially in towns, had shared privies. Multiple families using the same pit. Imagine the social dynamics. Imagine the spread of disease. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, all spread through fecal contamination of water sources. Which, remember that stream you're drinking from. Somebody's privy pit is leaking into it upstream. The medieval water cycle was basically a disease transmission system. Menstruation in medieval winter deserves its own circle of hell. Women used cloth rags, literally called rags, that they'd wash and reuse. Except you can't wash them in winter. So you'd accumulate used rags, maybe rinse them minimally with precious water, hang them near the fire to dry, and reuse them. The hygiene implications are staggering. Infections were common. Toxic shock syndrome wasn't identified until modern times, but women were definitely dying from it. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the connection between cleanliness and health or whether they just thought disease was caused by bad air and divine punishment. Evidence suggests both. Some medical texts recommended washing hands before treating wounds, indicating some understanding. But the theoretical knowledge didn't translate to practice when practice was impossible. You can know that bathing is healthier and still not bathe because you physically can't. Your teeth are another disaster in progress. You're eating grain porridge that's gritty with stone particles from grinding. That grit is slowly wearing down your enamel. You're not brushing. Toothbrushes won't be common for centuries. Maybe you chew on a frayed stick to clean between teeth. Maybe you just accept that your teeth will be yellow, then brown, then gone. Dental hygiene is aspirational at best. Your breath smells like decay. Not figuratively, literally. Food particles rotting between teeth, gum disease, stomach issues from questionable food and water. When you speak, people smell it. They don't comment because their breath is equally bad. Medieval close talking must have been an assault on the senses. The phrase kissing distance meant you were brave. Let's talk about the livestock situation because if you're keeping animals inside, and you probably are, that adds whole new dimensions to your hygiene nightmare. A pig produces about 2 gallons of urine and 15 pounds of manure per day. Per day. Where does that go? You've got a corner of your cabin designated as the animal area, probably covered in straw that's supposed to absorb the waste. That straw is now a toxic sludge that can't be properly cleaned because everything's frozen and you can't afford to waste the straw. The smell is beyond description. Modern people who visit working historical farms, even well-maintained ones, talk about the overwhelming smell of animals. Now put those animals in an enclosed space with no ventilation except cracks in the walls. Add smoke from the fire, add human waste, add unwashed humans, add cooking smells, and let it all marinate for 5 months. That's your air quality. You breathe that. You sleep in that. You eat in that. You'll develop a cough. Everyone has a winter cough. It's from the smoke and the poor air quality and the damp cold. You'll cough so much that your ribs ache. You'll cough up things you'd rather not examine too closely. This is normal. This is healthy people. Sick people cough worse. Skin conditions flourish in these conditions. Boils, rashes, fungal infections, frostbite blisters. Your skin is under constant assault from cold, damp, dirt, and poor nutrition. You'll develop chilblains, painful inflammation of small blood vessels in response to cold. They itch and burn, and there's nothing you can do except wait for spring. You'll have cracked, bleeding hands from the constant exposure to cold water and rough work. Those cracks get infected. Those infections become serious problems. Your fingernails are broken and blackened with dirt ground so deeply that it's part of the nail itself. Your toenails are worse because your feet are always damp and confined in shoes. You might lose toenails to fungal infections and not even notice until spring when you finally take off your shoes and discover you've been walking on infected nail beds for months. The concept of presentable doesn't exist. There's no clean version of yourself to present. This is it. Dirty, smelly, infested, infected, and just trying to survive until the world thaws enough to allow basic hygiene again. Medieval people didn't have lower standards. They had impossible circumstances. You can maintain standards when maintenance is possible. When it's not, you just endure. And the psychological impact of living in filth is hard to overstate. You feel disgusting because you are disgusting. But acknowledging it doesn't help because you can't fix it. So you dissociate. You stop noticing. You accept that itching is constant, that smelling bad is normal, that this is just what being human means in winter. Your sense of self adjusts downward to accommodate reality. Come spring, if you make it to spring, you'll heat water and bathe and discover you're several shades lighter than you thought you were. The dirt comes off in layers. You'll find lice you didn't know you had. You'll discover skin problems that developed unseen under grime. Spring cleaning wasn't a tradition. It was a medical necessity. But spring is months away. Right now, you're dirty and getting dirtier, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it except wait. The sun sets at 4:30 in the afternoon, and suddenly your entire world shrinks to the radius of firelight. Maybe 6 feet of visible space if your fire is doing well. Beyond that, darkness so complete that you can hold your hand in front of your face and see nothing. Welcome to 16 hours of night every single day for months. Your modern brain is absolutely not prepared for this. You're sitting near the fire, always near the fire, and the darkness presses in from all sides like a physical presence. There are no street lights, no phone screens, no ambient light pollution bleeding through windows from a world that never sleeps. Just black, pure, absolute, medieval black. The kind of darkness that humans evolved to fear because darkness meant predators and danger and death. Let's talk about lighting options, because fire isn't just for heat. It's your only illumination source. The hearth provides flickering, inconsistent light that casts wild shadows on the walls. Those shadows move and dance, creating the illusion of movement where there is none. Your brain, desperate for stimulation in the sensory void, starts seeing things. Faces in the shadows, figures moving at the edge of vision. This isn't madness. It's pattern recognition software running on insufficient data. You could make a rush light, a dried rush plant dipped in animal fat that burns for maybe an hour. But animal fat is food. You're burning calories for light, and the cost-benefit analysis is brutal. One rush light uses fat that could have gone into your soup, could have provided 50 calories, could have kept you alive a little bit longer. So you use rush lights sparingly, only when you absolutely need light for a specific task. Most evenings, you just sit in firelight and darkness. Candles exist, but they're expensive. Beeswax candles are for churches and nobility. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, are technically accessible, but again, that's fat you're not eating. A tallow candle smells like burning meat, which is torture when you're hungry. It smokes. It gutters. It provides maybe the light equivalent of a modern nightlight. You'd need half a dozen burning to read by, and reading assumes you can read, which most people can't. So what do you do with 16 hours of darkness? You sit. You talk if there are other people with you. You tell stories. You remember that before electricity, before books were common, oral tradition was how information transferred. You'll hear the same stories over and over. Legends, family histories, cautionary tales. They start to blur together. By February, you've heard your father's story about the winter of 1290 approximately 60 times. The silence is oppressive. In your modern life, there's always sound, traffic, electronics, neighbors, the hum of refrigerators and heating systems. Here, silence, the crackling of fire, maybe wind outside, maybe the breathing of whoever shares this space with you, maybe an animal shifting in the corner. That's it. The absence of sound makes every small noise enormous. A branch scraping the roof sounds like an intruder. A mouse in the walls sounds like a monster. Your circadian rhythm is completely disrupted. Humans are supposed to sleep when it's dark, but you can't sleep for 16 hours. That's not how bodies work. So you're awake in the darkness, unable to do anything productive, unable to see well enough to work, just existing in a void. Your sleep fractures into pieces. You sleep a few hours, wake up, sit in darkness, sleep again, wake again. Medieval people practiced biphasic sleep patterns not by choice but by necessity. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced less seasonal affective disorder because their lives were so physically demanding that sunlight deprivation didn't register, or whether SAD was simply not documented because feeling terrible in winter was so universal that it wasn't considered a disorder. The evidence leans toward everyone was miserable and that was normal. You're not depressed. You're appropriately responding to terrible circumstances. The lack of entertainment is going to break something in your brain. No books unless you're wealthy and literate, which you're not. No games beyond maybe a carved chess set if you're fortunate. No music unless someone present can sing or play an instrument. No puzzles. No crafts that require good light. No activities that need tools you don't have or materials you can't afford. Just sitting, thinking, existing in the dark. You'll count things to pass time. Count the stones in the hearth. Count the rafters. Count your breaths. Count how many days until spring, then lose track and have to start over. Time becomes elastic. Days feel like weeks. Weeks feel like months. You have no clock, no schedule, no external structure. Dawn comes eventually, but dawn in January is around 8 in the morning, and it's a gray, weak dawn that barely qualifies as light. Your mind starts doing strange things. You'll have conversations with people who aren't there. Not hallucinations exactly, more like your brain trying to create stimulation where none exists. You'll replay arguments from years ago, inventing better responses. You'll plan elaborate meals you'll never cook. You'll design houses you'll never build. Your internal mental life becomes hyperactive to compensate for the absolute lack of external input. The darkness amplifies every fear. You hear something outside. Probably just wind, probably just an animal, probably nothing. But in the darkness, it becomes bandits, raiders, wolves. Your imagination fills the void with threats. You lie in your straw bed, frozen in terror, listening to nothing and hearing everything. This is every night. The fear never fully goes away because you can't verify that you're safe. You just have to trust that the darkness isn't hiding something that wants to kill you. Children are terrified. Medieval children grew up with stories of monsters and demons and things that lurk in darkness. Those stories served a purpose. They kept kids close to home, away from dangers, but they also created profound psychological terror. A child crying in the darkness, unable to be comforted because you can't show them there's nothing there. You can't turn on a light and prove the monster isn't real. You just hold them and wait for dawn. Let's talk about cabin fever, because that's what's really happening here. You're trapped inside. Going outside means exposure to deadly cold. So you stay in your 12 by 15 foot space with the same people doing the same nothing 4 days and weeks and months. The walls feel like they're closing in. You know every crack, every stain, every imperfection. You could navigate your cabin blind, and you essentially do every night. Arguments start over nothing. Someone breathes too loudly. Someone takes more than their share of fire space. Someone tells that story wrong. These escalate because there's no way to separate, no way to take a break from each other. You're stuck together until spring. Medieval domestic violence spiked in winter. People killed each other over stupid disputes because the psychological pressure of confinement broke something essential in their minds. You fantasize about outside, about walking more than 15 feet without hitting a wall, about seeing the horizon, about space and distance and freedom. But outside is death, so you stay inside and slowly lose your mind in socially acceptable ways. You develop tics. You rock back and forth. You pick at your skin. You do anything to create some kind of sensation, some kind of change in the endless monotony. The fire becomes your television. You watch the flames for hours because there's literally nothing else to look at. You see shapes in the coals. You interpret them like reading tea leaves. That coal looks like a horse. Maybe spring will come early. That flame jumped left. Someone's going to visit tomorrow. You're inventing meaning because humans need meaning and you have no other source. Sleep disturbances are universal. You can't sleep well when you're cold and hungry and uncomfortable, but you also can't stay awake productively in the darkness. So you drift in this twilight state, not quite asleep, not quite awake. You dream vividly, your brain compensating with rich internal experiences to make up for the poverty of external ones. You'll have dreams that feel more real than your waking life. You'll wake up confused about which is which. Some people talk about medieval people being more spiritual, more connected to something transcendent. Maybe. Or maybe when you're sitting in darkness for 16 hours with nothing to do, you start praying because prayer is something, and something is better than nothing. You'll pray for spring. You'll pray for food. You'll pray for the fire to stay lit. You'll pray because the alternative is sitting in silence with your thoughts, and your thoughts are increasingly dark. The concept of going to bed is weird when there's no clear distinction between day and night activities. You're not productive in darkness. You're just waiting. So you lie down when you're tired, regardless of time. You might sleep from 7 p.m. to midnight, wake up, sit by the fire for 3 hours, sleep again until dawn. There's no schedule to maintain. There's no reason to stay awake except that sleep won't come. Medieval people had folk beliefs about winter darkness, spirits and creatures that only came out when the sun was gone. These weren't just superstitions. They were psychological coping mechanisms. Better to believe the darkness contains specific, named threats than to sit with the existential terror of absolute void. You can protect yourself against a troll or a demon. You can't protect yourself against nothingness. You'll lose track of days. Was it 3 days ago or 4 that you last went to the well? How many Sundays have passed? What month is it even? Time markers disappear. Every day is the same. Wake in darkness, tend fire, ration food, sit in darkness, sleep fitfully, repeat. The sameness is maddening. You need variation to maintain sanity, and there is no variation. By midwinter, you're talking to yourself, out loud, narrating your actions. I'm adding wood to the fire now. I'm checking the food stores. I'm going to the well. You do this because the sound of a human voice, even your own, is better than silence. It reminds you that you exist, that you're still human, that this isn't just a fever dream of darkness and cold. Entertainment becomes incredibly simple things. You'll watch snow fall through the gap under your door and find it fascinating. You'll study the patterns in the wood grain of your walls. You'll invent games with yourself. Can I hold my breath for 50 counts? Can I balance this stick on my finger? These aren't sophisticated entertainments. They're the desperate attempts of a bored mind to create any kind of stimulus. The social dynamics in your cabin, if you're not alone, become intensely weird. You know these people too well. You've memorized their habits, their expressions, their sounds. You can predict what they'll say before they say it. The loss of novelty in human interaction is its own kind of death. These people you loved in summer become irritants in winter because there's no escape from them. And lurking under everything is the awareness that this isn't temporary. This is months. You're not even halfway through. Spring feels like a concept, not a real thing that will actually happen. The darkness is permanent. The cold is permanent. This cabin is your entire universe, and your universe is slowly crushing you. You stare into the fire, watching shadows dance on the walls, and wonder if you're going to make it through this with your mind intact. The honest answer is probably no. Everyone emerges from winter a little broken, a little less themselves. The darkness takes something from you that you don't get back. But dawn will come. Eventually, in a few hours, the blackness will fade to gray. You'll see the vague shapes of your cabin again. You'll have maybe 8 hours of weak daylight to remind yourself that the world is real, that you exist in 3 dimensions, that this will end. And then darkness will return, as it does every day, as it will tomorrow, as it has forever. You wake up with a scratchy throat. That's it. Just a minor irritation, the kind of thing you'd ignore in your modern life. Maybe take some ibuprofen and move on with your day. But here, in your freezing medieval cabin, that scratchy throat might as well be a death sentence. Welcome to illness in an era where healthcare means hoping really hard while rubbing herbs on things. Let's start with the basics. You're already weakened. Months of cold exposure, inadequate nutrition, chronic dehydration, and sleep deprivation have turned your immune system into a sad joke. Your body is running on fumes, dedicating every available resource to keeping you alive and warm. It has nothing left over for fighting off infections. That scratchy throat is about to become something much worse. By the next morning, you've got a full-blown cold. Your nose is running constantly, which is its own nightmare because you don't have tissues. You have your sleeve. You have rags if you're fortunate. Mostly you just sniff constantly or let it drip and wipe it with your already filthy hands. Your throat feels like you've been swallowing broken glass. Your head pounds with sinus pressure. Every muscle aches. In modern times, you take decongestants, drink orange juice, rest on the couch with Netflix. Here, you still need to maintain the fire. You still need to get water. You still need to feed yourself and any animals. There are no sick days. There's no one to take care of you unless you have family present. And even then, they can't do much except keep the fire going while you shiver in your straw bed. Medieval medicine is a fascinating mix of practical knowledge, complete nonsense, and things that might accidentally work. The theory of humors dominates medical thinking, the idea that health depends on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your cold is seen as an excess of phlegm, a cold and wet humor. The treatment? Attempt to dry and warm you, which given that you're already freezing seems counterproductive. But that's medieval logic. Someone might suggest bloodletting. Yes, really. The theory is that releasing some blood will rebalance your humors. In practice, you're making an already weakened person weaker by literally draining their blood. People died from the treatments more often than from the diseases. But you're desperate, and desperate people try anything. So maybe you let the local healer cut your arm and drain some blood into a bowl, and then you feel even worse, and everyone agrees that means the treatment is working and you need more bloodletting. Herbal remedies are hit or miss. Some actually work. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Chamomile has mild anti-inflammatory properties. Honey genuinely helps soothe throats and has antimicrobial effects. But for every useful herb, there are 10 useless or actively harmful ones. You'll drink foul-tasting teas made from plants you can't identify, hoping one of them helps. Your cold is worsening. Your cough is productive now. You're bringing up thick, discolored mucus. This would be concerning in any era, but here it's terrifying because, somewhere in your medieval understanding that people die from coughs. Consumption, they call it. Tuberculosis, you'd call it if you had modern knowledge. You don't know if this is just a bad cold or the beginning of something that will slowly consume your lungs over the next months or years. Fever sets in. Your body is fighting the infection the only way it knows how, by cranking up its internal temperature to kill the invaders. But you're in a cabin that's barely above freezing. Your body is trying to generate heat while losing it constantly to the cold environment. You're burning through calories at an alarming rate, calories you don't have to spare. You're shivering violently, wrapped in every scrap of fabric you own, lying as close to the fire as possible without catching fire yourself. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood contagion or whether they thought disease spread through bad air or divine punishment. Evidence suggests they knew sick people made others sick. Isolation of the ill was practiced during plague outbreaks, but they didn't understand mechanism. They didn't know about viruses or bacteria. They just knew that being near sick people was dangerous. If you have family in your cabin, they're going to get sick too. There's no way to isolate in a 12 by 15 foot space. You're all breathing the same smoky air, touching the same surfaces, sharing the same limited resources. Within days, everyone is coughing. The cabin sounds like a tuberculosis ward. The combined noise of multiple people coughing, sniffling, moaning is its own form of torture. Your appetite disappears, which is almost a blessing because you don't have much food anyway. But you need to eat to fuel your fever to give your body resources to fight. You force down porridge that tastes like ash in your fever-distorted mouth. You drink water when you remember to, though carrying it from the well is now a Herculean task that leaves you shaking and weak. Let's talk about what happens if this isn't just a cold. If it's influenza, actual flu, not the stomach bug modern people incorrectly call flu, you're in serious trouble. Medieval flu outbreaks killed people by the thousands. Your fever spikes to dangerous levels. You're delirious, seeing things that aren't there, saying things that make no sense. You might have seizures from the high fever. You might develop pneumonia as a secondary infection, filling your lungs with fluid, slowly drowning in your own body. Pneumonia in medieval winter is essentially a death sentence for the very young, the very old, and the already weakened. You lie in your straw bed, each breath a rattling struggle, fluid crackling in your lungs. You can't get enough oxygen. Your lips turn blue. Your family can do nothing but watch. Maybe they pray. Maybe they prepare for you to die. Maybe they've already started thinking about how to redistribute your meager resources once you're gone. Medical care, such as it exists, is expensive and often worse than nothing. A physician, if one is even available in your area, charges fees you can't afford. A barber surgeon might be more accessible, but their tools are crude and non-sterile. A folk healer might know genuinely helpful remedies or might give you something toxic. You're gambling either way. Some treatments sound reasonable until you think about them. Inhaling steam? Great idea, except you need to heat water, which costs fuel, and you need to be careful not to scald yourself. Poultices on your chest? Fine, but what's in the poultice? Might be useful herbs. Might be manure. Yes, really. Animal dung was used medicinally. The reasoning was complex and based on humor theory. The result was putting literal shit on open wounds and wondering why infections got worse. You'll be offered amulets and prayers. Religious relics that supposedly have healing power. Charms and incantations. Medieval medicine is inseparable from magic and religion. The priest might visit to perform last rites, which is comforting to believers and terrifying to everyone else because it means even God's representative thinks you're dying. Let's say you survive the initial infection. You're weak, drastically weak. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. Your muscles have atrophied from days of lying still. Standing up makes you dizzy. Walking to the well is impossible. Someone else has to do it, assuming someone else is healthy enough. You're now a burden on your household, consuming resources without contributing labor. The guilt is crushing. Recovery takes weeks. Modern people with modern medicine recover from flu in maybe a week or two. You're looking at a month before you're functional again, and functional means able to do basic tasks while feeling terrible. You've lost strength you won't fully regain until spring when food is more available. This illness has probably shortened your lifespan, even if it didn't kill you outright. And here's the nightmare scenario. Injury on top of illness. You're weak and feverish, you get up to tend the fire, you stumble and fall into the hearth. Burns. Serious burns because your reaction time is impaired and you can't pull away quickly. Now you have infected wounds to deal with on top of everything else. Or you go outside while sick because you have to, there's no choice, and you fall on ice. Break an arm. Fracture a leg. These aren't inconveniences. They're catastrophes. A broken bone means immobility for weeks. Someone has to set it, probably badly, probably without any kind of anesthetic. You'll bite down on leather while they pull the bone back into place. They'll splint it with sticks and hope. If it heals crooked, which it probably will, you're crippled for life. If infection sets in, which it might, you could lose the limb. Or your life. Medieval surgical intervention is butchery with good intentions. No anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium if you're extremely fortunate. No sterile technique because germs aren't discovered yet. Instruments are washed, maybe, but not sterilized. The pain is unimaginable. The survival rate is abysmal. You'd rather die than undergo surgery, and you might die from the surgery anyway, so it's lose-lose. Dental problems are particularly nightmarish. That toothache you've been ignoring? It's an abscess now. The infection is spreading into your jaw, possibly your bloodstream. The solution is extraction. Someone, probably not a professional, will pull your tooth using crude forceps, probably breaking it in the process, definitely causing agony. The extraction site will bleed for hours. It might get infected anyway, but leaving the tooth in means definite death from sepsis, so out it comes. Children die at appalling rates. That cold that made you miserable for a week kills infants. Their immune systems are underdeveloped. Their nutritional status is marginal. They don't have the reserves to fight. You watch a child go from sniffles to fever to death in 3 days, and there's nothing you can do. You bury small bodies in frozen ground and try not to think about it because you still have to survive. The psychological toll of illness in these conditions is severe. You're sick, which is physically miserable. You're also terrified because you don't know if this is a minor illness or the beginning of your death. Every cough could be your last. Every fever could be the one that doesn't break. You lie in darkness, remember, it's dark for 16 hours, and contemplate your mortality in very concrete terms. If you're religious, you bargain with God. You promise to be better, to sin less, to dedicate your life to service, if only you survive this. If you're not religious, you bargain anyway with the universe or fate or whatever might be listening. Humans facing death will negotiate with anything. The promises you make while feverish and terrified are binding in your mind, even if they're impossible to keep. You develop a horror of sickness that will last long after you recover. Every sniffle from another person makes you panic. Every cough sends you into anxiety sperms. You become hypervigilant about symptoms, checking yourself constantly, convinced that every minor discomfort is the beginning of another potentially fatal illness. This is rational fear based on real danger. This is how people lived. Eventually, if you're fortunate, the fever breaks. You wake up one morning and you're sweating instead of shivering. Your temperature has normalized. You feel weak and wrung out but alive. The relief is overwhelming. You've survived. Others in your cabin might not have been so lucky. Medieval households routinely lost members to winter illnesses. You might be recovering while grieving, but you made it. Barely. You're thinner, weaker, damaged, but breathing. You've got months of winter still ahead, and another cold could finish what this one started. So you're careful. As careful as you can be when careful means nothing more than existing in terrible conditions and hoping luck favors you. The scratchy throat that started this nightmare is gone. In its place is a deep appreciation for health that modern people rarely feel. Being not sick is a blessing. Being able to breathe without pain, to swallow without agony, to exist without fever. These are gifts. You'll remember this illness for the rest of your life, however long that might be, and you'll dread the next one. You hear a knock at your door, 3 sharp raps that cut through the darkness, and your first emotion isn't curiosity, it's fear, because nobody travels in winter for fun. A knock at your door means something has gone wrong somewhere, and whatever problem brought someone through freezing darkness to your cabin might be about to become your problem. But you open the door anyway because in medieval winter, the social web is the only thing standing between you and death. It's your neighbor, Thomas, and you can see from his face that this is bad. His family's grain store is infested with rats. Not just a few rats. An infestation that's destroyed weeks' worth of food. He's not asking for charity exactly. He's invoking the unspoken agreement that exists in every medieval community. Today him, tomorrow you. You help him now because you might need help next week, and the whole village survives together or dies together. This is how medieval winter worked. Your survival isn't individual. It's collective. The modern fantasy of rugged individualism, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, of making it on your own, that's a luxury of abundance. In scarcity, independence is suicide. You need your neighbors. They need you. The web of mutual obligation is complex, unwritten, and absolutely binding. Let's map out this social structure because your life depends on understanding it. There's your immediate family, whoever shares your cabin. Then there's your extended family in nearby cabins, cousins, in-laws, siblings who've married and moved out but stayed local. Beyond that, the village or hamlet may be 30 to 50 families depending on the area. Everyone knows everyone. There are no strangers. Privacy doesn't exist. This interconnection means information travels fast. Thomas's rat problem? The whole village knows by tomorrow. Not as gossip necessarily, but as strategic intelligence. Rats in one grain store might spread to others. Everyone needs to check their stores. Someone might have extra grain to spare, or might be concealing the fact that they have extra, which is also important information. The social calculus is constant. You give Thomas a small sack of barley. Not much, you can't afford much, but enough to show good faith. He thanks you with a formality that would seem excessive in modern times, but here carries weight. This debt is recorded in the collective memory of the community. Not written down, most people can't write, but remembered. Thomas owes you. His children will know he owes you. If you need help next month, he's obligated to provide it. But here's where it gets complicated. What if Thomas can't repay? What if his family doesn't make it through winter? Then the debt transfers, in a sense, to his relatives. Or it's forgiven in the collective understanding that he tried. Or it becomes a mark against his family's reputation if people think he could have managed better. Medieval social systems are simultaneously more flexible and more rigid than modern ones. Historians still argue whether medieval communities were genuinely cooperative or whether the cooperation masked deep resentments and zero-sum thinking. Evidence suggests both. People helped each other and resented helping. They cooperated because they had to, not necessarily because they wanted to. The forced intimacy of small, isolated communities created bonds and hatreds in equal measure. Let's talk about the hierarchy, because even in your tiny village, social stratification exists. There's probably a local lord or landowner, someone who owns the land your cabin sits on. You're a tenant, paying rent in labor or in kind. The lord has more resources, better shelter, larger food stores. But even the lord can't escape winter. He's just suffering more comfortably than you are. The Lord's survival depends on your survival, though he might not admit it. You work his fields in spring and summer. You provide labor for his projects. If his tenants die over winter, he has no workforce come planting season. So there's incentive for him to help in severe circumstances, distributing grain during the worst shortages, allowing wood gathering in his forests, overlooking missed rent payments. This isn't kindness. It's economic calculation. The church plays a complex role. The local priest is probably only marginally better off than you are. He has a slightly better cabin near the church. He receives tithes, a portion of everyone's harvest. But he's also expected to help the destitute. The church is the social safety net, such as it exists. When families are truly desperate, they go to the priest. Sometimes he helps. Sometimes he can't. Sometimes he judges their desperation as insufficient and sends them away. You attend church on Sundays if the weather permits. Not purely from religious devotion, though that's real for many, but because church is the social hub. It's where you see everyone, exchange information, conduct informal business, arrange marriages, settle disputes. Missing church isolates you from the community network. Isolation in winter is dangerous. So you go, even if it means walking through snow and sitting in a stone building that's even colder than your cabin. The social dynamics around food are particularly fraught. Everyone knows roughly what everyone else has. You can't hide abundance in a community this small. If you have extra and refuse to share when others are starving, you're marked. Selfish, untrustworthy. When you need help, and you will need help eventually, people remember. The reverse is also true. Share too generously and you might deplete your own stores, making yourself the one who needs charity later. There's a woman in your village, Old Margaret, who's known for her healing knowledge. She knows which herbs help with which ailments, how to set broken bones, how to birth babies. She's not a trained physician. She's learned through apprenticeship and experience. Her services are in demand all winter. People pay her in food, favors, promises of future labor. She's accumulating social capital, building a web of debts owed. This is power in a society without formal currency. But Margaret is also vulnerable. If her treatments fail, and they often do because medieval medicine is terrible, she risks accusations. Of incompetence at best, of witchcraft at worst. Medieval people understood that correlation isn't causation in abstract terms, but when your child dies after Margaret gave her a tonic, the temptation to blame Margaret is overwhelming. Scapegoating is a survival mechanism for grief and rage. Your relationships with neighbors are complicated by proximity and resource competition. Thomas, whose family you just helped. You also resent him because his oldest son is strong and capable, able to do heavy work, while your son is sickly. His family has advantages yours doesn't, through no fault or virtue of either family. Just chance. But resentment festers in the endless dark evenings. And by February you're avoiding Thomas because seeing his healthy family makes you bitter. Marriage alliances are strategic in ways modern people find mercenary. Families arrange marriages to consolidate resources, to ally with productive families, to ensure someone capable is available for labor. Love is a bonus, not a requirement. A young woman marries into a family with good grain stores and solid shelter. A young man marries a woman whose father has valuable skills. Blacksmithing, carpentry, whatever. These aren't romantic decisions. They're survival calculations. Domestic arrangements vary by family. Some households are multigenerational, grandparents, parents, children all sharing one cabin. This has advantages. More labor, more knowledge, shared childcare. But also disadvantages. More mouths to feed, more personalities in conflict, elderly members who consume resources without contributing much labor. The calculus of keeping grandma alive through winter is brutal and nobody says it out loud, but everyone thinks it. When someone in the community dies, the funeral is partly about grief and partly about resource redistribution. The deceased's possessions get divided among family, but tools might go to whoever can best use them, and food stores might be distributed more broadly. There's pressure to be generous with the dead's property. Hoarding in the face of community need is socially unacceptable. But there's also jockeying for position, arguments over who deserves what. Let's address crime because winter desperation makes people do desperate things. Theft is the primary crime. Someone's grain store gets raided in the night. Firewood disappears from woodpiles. Tools vanish. The community knows it's someone local. There are no outsiders traveling in winter. This creates suspicion and paranoia. You look at your neighbors and wonder who's desperate enough to steal. You guard your resources more carefully. You sleep lighter. If a thief is caught, punishment is harsh because theft threatens everyone's survival. Not just the victims. If theft is tolerated, social order collapses. The punishment might be physical. Beatings, time in stocks, public humiliation. In severe cases, exile, which in winter is effectively a death sentence. The Lord might get involved, or the community might handle it themselves. Either way, the message is clear. We cooperate or we all die, and breaking the social contract has consequences. But here's the paradox. The same community that harshly punishes theft will collectively overlook someone taking from the Lord's stores if the person is genuinely starving. There's a moral distinction between stealing from neighbors, who are also struggling, and stealing from the Lord, who has more than he needs. Poaching the Lord's deer, taking his firewood. These are crimes, but they're understood crimes. The community's silence is a form of resistance. Gender dynamics in winter are interesting. In summer, labor is divided along gendered lines, men in fields, women in domestic spaces. In winter, everyone's primarily doing domestic labor. Maintaining fire, preparing food, mending tools, spinning wool. The distinctions blur. But women's knowledge becomes more valuable: food preservation, textile production, household management, nursing the sick. A capable woman is a family's greatest asset in winter. Children are labor and burden simultaneously. Old enough to help, fetching water, tending fire, watching younger siblings, they're assets. Too young to help, their mouths to feed with nothing to contribute. Medieval people loved their children, but they also calculated their value. The decision to give a sick child extra food, potentially saving their life, versus giving that food to healthy workers who will definitely survive, It's horrific by modern standards and routine by medieval ones. The village idiot, as medieval people unkindly called people with intellectual disabilities, presents a moral question. They can't contribute labor proportional to their consumption. But their community members, known since birth, loved by their families. Most communities kept them alive if possible, integrating them into whatever tasks they could manage. This is surprising humanity in an era often characterized as brutal. Or maybe it's calculated. If we abandon the vulnerable today, who'll protect us when we're vulnerable tomorrow? Conflict resolution in winter is critical because you can't afford feuds. If two families hate each other but need to cooperate to survive, someone, usually the priest or the lord, mediates. Pride is a luxury. You swallow your anger, apologize even when you're not wrong. Make peace because the alternative is mutual destruction. Medieval people got very good at smiling through gritted teeth. But long winter nights are when old grudges resurface. When you're sitting in darkness with nothing to do, you remember that insult from last summer. You replay arguments. You nurse resentments. By spring, communities are pressure cookers of suppressed conflict that explodes in violence and litigation once the weather allows travel to courts. Winter doesn't prevent conflict. It just freezes it in place. The social web is both safety net and cage. It saves you when you're desperate and suffocates you when you need independence. You can't make major decisions without community input. You can't fail without everyone knowing. You can't succeed without sharing. Your life is perpetually public, perpetually judged, perpetually constrained by the needs and expectations of others. But Thomas is at your door and his children are hungry, and you give him grain because that's how this works. Tomorrow or next week or next winter, you'll knock on someone's door, and they'll help you because you helped Thomas. The web holds, sometimes, until it doesn't, and when it breaks, people die. You close the door after Thomas leaves and return to your fire, a little colder now for the open door, a little hungrier now for the given grain. The knock might come again, probably will. That's winter. That's survival. That's the only way through. The ice on the well is thinner this morning. You notice it while breaking through. The pole sinks faster, meets less resistance. It's March, maybe early April, and something fundamental is shifting. The air doesn't have quite the same knife-edge quality. The sun, when it appears, has actual warmth behind it instead of just light. Spring is coming. You've survived. Except surviving winter might have been the easy part. Let's talk about what winter did to your body, because the damage is extensive and visible. You've lost weight, significant weight. Your clothes hang loose on a frame that's more angles than curves. Your ribs are visible. Your face is gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut. This isn't aesthetic thinness. This is starvation body. The look of someone whose system has been cannibalizing itself for fuel for months. Your muscles have atrophied. The physical labor of summer and autumn built strength that winter systematically destroyed. You haven't been moving much, just the bare minimum to survive. Your legs are weak. Your arms shake when you lift the water bucket. You get winded climbing the slight hill from the well. You're going to need to rebuild the strength for planting season, which is literally weeks away, and you don't have the calories to fuel that rebuilding. Your skin is a disaster. Months without bathing have left you with layers of grime, but underneath that, the skin itself is damaged. Vitamin deficiencies have made it rough and scaly. You've got scurvy symptoms, bleeding gums, loosening teeth, old wounds that partially reopened. Your fingernails are ridged and brittle. Your hair is dull and falls out in clumps when you run your fingers through it. You look like you've aged a decade in 5 months. The chronic cough isn't going away. Everyone has it, that persistent, rattling cough that brings up questionable material. Months of smoke inhalation and respiratory infections have damaged your lungs. Some people's coughs will last into summer. Some will never fully recover. That whistling sound when you breathe deep, that's probably permanent damage. Congratulations, you've got medieval COPD at age 35. Psychologically, you're not okay. Nobody's okay. The isolation and sensory deprivation and constant stress have fractured something essential. You're irritable, snapping at people over nothing. Your attention span is shot, you start tasks and abandon them halfway through. You have nightmares about darkness, about cold, about being trapped. You wake up panicking, convinced you're still in the dead of winter, and it takes minutes to orient yourself to reality. Depression is universal. Not just sadness, clinical, physical depression. Your body's chemistry is wrecked from malnutrition and chronic stress. You feel numb and exhausted and hopeless even though spring is demonstrably arriving. You should be happy. You're alive. But happiness requires neurotransmitters you don't have because your body used everything just to keep you breathing. Let's address the elephant in the thawing room. Your food stores are gone, completely depleted. You're eating the last scraps, the moldy bits you saved for absolute emergencies. You made it through winter, but you made it through by consuming everything. And here's the cruel joke. Planting season is starting, but harvest is months away. You're entering the hunger gap, that period between winter stores and summer harvest when starvation was most common. Medieval people called it the starving time. Late spring and early summer, when last year's food is exhausted and this year's crops aren't ready. You look around your village and everyone is in the same state. Gaunt, weak, desperate. Children have stopped growing. The elderly are dying now in spring after surviving winter because their bodies have nothing left. The irony is brutal. You made it through the worst of winter only to die in the warming weather. Historians still argue whether the hunger gap killed more people than winter itself or whether the deaths were simply more visible because they happened when people could travel and communicate. Evidence suggests hunger gap mortality was devastating, possibly worse than winter proper. You survived cold. Now you have to survive hunger while doing the most physically demanding work of the year. Because planting can't wait. Fields need to be prepared. Seeds need to go in the ground at specific times or they won't mature before next winter. You need to work hard physical labor on a body that's running on empty. You're burning calories you don't have, digging into reserves that are already gone. People collapse in fields. They have heart attacks from physical exertion on damaged cardiovascular systems. They simply can't do the work, and not doing the work means no harvest, which means death next winter. You're eating things you wouldn't have considered food in October. Spring greens, weeds, basically, are the first fresh food available. Dandelion leaves, wild garlic, whatever's pushing up through the thawing ground. You're foraging desperately, competing with animals who are equally desperate. These greens are bitter and not particularly nutritious, but they're fresh and they're something. The water situation is paradoxically worse now. Winter ice is melting, which means your streams and wells are full of runoff. That runoff is carrying months of accumulated animal waste, human waste, dead things that froze over winter and are now decomposing. The water is brown and smells terrible and is absolutely teeming with pathogens. You boil it religiously, but even boiled water from spring runoff can make you sick. Dysentery outbreaks are common in spring. The combination of contaminated water and desperate foraging means people are consuming all sorts of bacteria and parasites. You'll spend days with severe diarrhea, losing fluids, losing what little nutrition you managed to consume. Dehydration is a serious risk now, when water is literally everywhere. The abundance is an illusion. It's all poisonous. Animals that survived winter are in terrible shape too. Your chickens, if any survived, are scraggly and egg production is nil because they don't have nutrition for eggs. Your cow, if you kept one alive, is skeletal. Her milk production has dropped to almost nothing. That pig you overwintered? He's thin and weak and less valuable now than he was in autumn. You've spent months keeping these animals alive and they've deteriorated anyway. The thaw reveals other problems. Your roof has leaks you didn't know about because the water was frozen. Now it's melting and dripping through. Your walls have cracks that expanded during freeze-thaw cycles. Your food storage area is exposed as inadequate. You can see where water got in, where rodents made nests. The structural damage to your cabin is extensive and you don't have materials or energy to fix it. Bodies appear. People who died in winter and were buried in shallow frozen graves or just left in outbuildings because the ground was too frozen to dig. Now they're thawing and they're health hazards. Communities organize burial details, digging proper graves, trying to get the dead underground before they become sources of disease. It's grim work made worse by your weakened state. The smell of spring in medieval times isn't flowers and fresh air. It's rot. Everything that was frozen is now decomposing. Animal corpses, human waste, spoiled food, everything. The accumulated filth of winter is revealed and it's overwhelming. You're supposed to clean, to muck out your cabin, to establish better sanitation, but you're so tired. Everyone's so tired. Social bonds are fraying. The cooperation that got you through winter is dissolving now that individual survival seems possible again. Arguments over property boundaries, over who owes what to whom, over winter slights real and imagined. They all erupt. The priest is busy mediating disputes. The Lord's court has a backlog of cases. Everyone's irritable and damaged and taking it out on each other. Some families didn't make it intact. You look around and notice absences. Thomas's wife died in February. You'd heard, but now you're seeing the impact. His household is struggling without her labor. Those children without a mother, looking lost and underfed. The widow 3 houses down lost her husband and now has no one to do heavy field work. These fractured families will struggle more than intact ones. There's pressure to reorganize households. Widows are encouraged to remarry quickly, not for romance but for labor pooling. Orphans are distributed to relatives or other families who can use their labor. It's practical and heartless simultaneously. Medieval people couldn't afford sentiment when survival was at stake. A child is a mouth to feed but also eventually a worker. The calculus is continuous. Your relationship with your own family is strained. You've been trapped together for months. You know every annoying habit, every flaw, every moment of weakness. The resentments are deep. You snap at your spouse over nothing. Your children irritate you just by existing. This is normal, everyone's experiencing it, but it doesn't make it easier. Some marriages don't survive winter. The proximity breaks something that never quite heals. Let's talk about what you're facing in terms of work. You need to plow fields, which require strength you don't have. You need to plant seeds, the seeds you managed not to eat over winter, which means your planting will be sparse. You need to repair tools that broke or degraded. You need to rebuild your home's weatherproofing. You need to reestablish all the systems that winter destroyed. And you need to do this while starving. The community is organizing work parties. Groups of families working together, pooling labor and tools. This is necessary because no individual family has the strength to do everything alone. But it's also contentious because not all labor is equal. A strong young man contributes more than an elderly woman, but both need to eat from the communal results. The negotiations are endless. You're also supposed to be preparing for next winter. Gathering wood. The wood you should have gathered last summer but didn't have enough of. Planning your food storage better. Making repairs that will matter come November. But you can't think about next winter. You can barely think about tomorrow. The idea of going through this again is so overwhelming that your brain simply refuses to process it. Some people leave. Every spring, young people especially decide they're done with this, done with agricultural subsistence, done with starvation cycles, done with this village. They head to towns, looking for apprenticeships or labor opportunities. Some succeed. Many end up begging. A few die on the roads. But the impulse to escape is understandable. What you've just experienced isn't sustainable long-term. People crack. The church offers hope, promises of heavenly reward for earthly suffering. The resurrection symbolism of Easter coinciding with spring. For believers, this helps. The suffering has meaning. It's temporary compared to eternal salvation. For skeptics, it's empty comfort. But even skeptics attend services because community is everything, and church is where community happens. You're standing in your doorway, watching the last patches of snow melt. You're alive. That's something. You've survived what kills many people. But you're damaged physically, psychologically, socially. Recovery will take months, and by the time you've recovered, autumn is coming, and with it the preparations for another winter. The cycle is endless. This is life. This is what it means to exist in medieval Europe. Spring isn't salvation. Spring is just a different form of struggle. The cold is gone, but the hunger remains. The darkness has lifted, but the exhaustion persists. You've traded freezing for starving, isolation for conflict, one set of survival challenges for another. And lurking in every sunny April day is the knowledge that winter will return. But for now, right now, the sun is warm on your face. The ice is melting. Tiny green shoots are pushing through dead ground. Birds are returning, filling the silence with sound. Life is reasserting itself against the void. You take a breath. It hurts, your damaged lungs protesting. And you take another, and another. You survived. Now you just have to keep surviving. The days grow longer now, stretching past dinner into soft twilight. You find yourself sitting outside sometimes, just sitting, feeling warmth that doesn't come from fire. The work is still brutal, your body still weak, your future still uncertain. But the absolute terror of winter, that bone-deep fear that you might not see another day, is receding. Slowly, like the snow melting in shadowed corners. You're learning to sleep differently. Without the constant cold, without the 16-hour darkness, your body is remembering rhythms it forgot. Dreams become less frantic. Waking becomes less panicked. There's still trauma there. You'll carry winter with you forever, but the sharp edges are dulling. Time and warmth are patient healers. In the evenings now, when work is done, you sit by your door and watch the world wake up. Watch your neighbors emerge from their own cabins, blinking in the light like creatures from hibernation. Everyone looks terrible, thin, damaged, aged, but everyone's alive. You exchange nods, small waves. Words aren't necessary. You all know what you've been through. You all know what it cost. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the hunger and the lingering fear, you feel something you haven't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, not hope even, but possibility. The possibility that this won't last forever. That food will come. That strength will return. That life might eventually feel like living instead of just surviving. The sun dips below the horizon. Later now, so much later than it did in January. The sky holds light even as darkness comes. You're not afraid of the dark anymore. Not the way you were. It's just night now. Just the normal rhythm of day following night following day. Eternal. Bearable. You'll face another winter someday. Maybe next year, maybe many years from now. And when you do, you'll remember this. Remember that you survived once. That others survived. That humans are tougher than they seem, more resilient than they believe. You'll remember that winter ends. It always ends. But that's tomorrow's worry. Tonight, the air is mild. The stars are bright. Your cabin, such as it is, stands ready. Your body, damaged as it is, still functions. You're alive. Against odds, against nature, against everything winter threw at you, you're alive. And for now, in this moment, that's enough. Sleep well,